everybody coming out. I appreciate it big time. I'll lower this a little bit. Bada boom. So as Cindy said, I'm Todd. I'm the owner of Kintore Coffee Company. We're based out of Embro, so it's like Boston pizza in Woodstock. But yeah, I've done a couple of these chats, and I went into it thinking like, I should talk about coffee and different origins and stuff like that. But I felt like people get pretty bored of that quick. So I just like to kind of tell our story of the coffee company and how we got started and everything like that, and a little bit about my life and leading up to the coffee company, because it's been a wild ride, that's for sure. So as Sydney said in that bio, I grew up farming. Always was a farmer. My family has been in Kintore for a very, very long time, and my grandfather was a farmer, and my dad was a farmer, and I was farming forever with him. Went to school at Ridgetown College, University of Guelph, and got my diploma in agriculture, and always thought I was just going to be a farmer. But when I was about 18 years old, I started traveling a little bit. So I drove out west and lived in Lake Louise, Alberta. And that was my first big adventure. I was there for 6 months or something like that. And then I took off from there to Ireland and Scotland. I came home and did some school and farming, and then I got the bug, and I just kept traveling for a few months, 3 to 4, for 4 to 6 months kind of deal every year for years, and really got to see the world. And as Sid said, I moved to Hawaii when I was about 21 years old. And my life had been Tim Hortons before this. There was the Timmy's in Tensford, and every day I'd get up and drive into Tensford and grab a double-double and then head out to the tractor and start working. And in my ignorance, I thought that Tim Hortons coffee was the creme de la creme of coffee across the world. And so when I moved to Hawaii, I didn't have a job. It's really hard to get a work visa in America. So I was with this lady, this woman that I was dating, and we were like, let's just wing it. So we flew to Oahu, and we were staying at Waikiki Beach, just in a hostel, and we'd called and emailed dozens and dozens of different hotels and kind of anything we could think of we would get a job at. And while we were in Oahu, a lady from the Big Island emailed us and said, hey, the manager at my bed and breakfast just quit. If you guys would like to come here, I will pay you under the table, and I'll pay for your flight to the other island. So we hopped on this little puddle jumper. We went to the Big Island, and we were just outside of this town called Kona. And Hawaii is famous for a specific coffee, which is arguably one of the best coffees in the world, and it's called Kona coffee. So Nita, her name was, she picked us up at the airport and drove us out to her beautiful bed and breakfast, and it was on a 5-acre coffee farm as well. So our duties were like, she was like, I can pay you $2 an hour cash, and she's like, but I will give you a free place to stay, free food, and a free car. And we were like, we won the lottery. So we moved there, and our duties were, most days we'd get up and serve breakfast to the guests, and then I would go out on the coffee farm, and they weren't certified organic or anything, but she really wanted to run it organically. So we picked all of the weeds every day by hand, me and this guy named the Dude, and really got to know a lot about coffee. I wasn't there for an actual harvest, but she had multiple bags, big burlap bags of previous harvests. So we'd take that down the road to a big coffee farm and get it roasted, and we were serving fresh roasted Kona coffee to our guests every morning. And we had guests from all over the world, and I'd be like, oh, if you ever go to Canada, you got to try this Tim Hortons. and I laugh at that now, yeah. And so really started drinking great coffee, but I didn't know I was drinking great coffee. I was loving the coffee, but I was still thinking oh man, when I get back to Canada, Tim Hortons, I can't wait. So when we flew home, I was there for 4 months maybe, and maybe 5 months, and I flew home, and right at the Pearson International Airport, I grabbed a Tim Hortons and I took a swig, and it tasted pretty awful to me. Wow. And I was thinking, they're not, all the stores aren't consistent between each one. I just got a bad one. So the next morning I got up and I went into the Tensford one and got it, and it still tasted awful. And I thought, what is going on here? And so got back into the swing of things, farming with my dad, and the next January, I moved to New Zealand for a little while, and I did a tour of New Zealand, Australia, and Thailand over like a 6-month period. And while I was in New Zealand and Australia, they like, you couldn't just go to a shop and ask for a drip coffee. Every single coffee they do there is an espresso. So so really started trying Americanos and lattes and cappuccinos and stuff, which I'd never had here before. And then again, moved back after that trip and got back on the old Tim Hortons train, and realized there's a lot more to coffee. I wasn't really interested in it that much at that time, but I knew that Tim Hortons wasn't the standard, like where you set the bar anymore. Like so was just drinking normal coffee and farming for a while. And after a bunch of years of traveling, I was like, I gotta settle down and kind of hone in and grow up a bit. So bought a house, and I farmed full time for about 8 years, doing small trips here and there, but no more like big long backpacking trips. And after I got married, my wife and I went to Iceland, and we were sitting in a cafe there, and I just had a drip coffee, and it was a fantastic cup of coffee. And I said to my wife, I said, I've always wanted to get into like learning about how coffee is roasted and made. It'd be nice to have coffee like this every morning. She was like, that's a great idea, do it. So that was in 2016, and so when we came home, we were living at her grandparents' farm. They'd passed away, and we moved into that house, and a bunch of their stuff was still there. And so I started reading stuff on the internet and watching YouTube videos and stuff on how to roast coffee. And I learned that you could roast coffee in a air popcorn maker. And so I knew in the cellar of her grandparents' place there was this old air popcorn maker, that exact one. And so I was like, oh, we have one of these things. I'm going to try this out. So I searched and found a place in London at the Covent Garden Market. It's still there. It's called Has Beans. And they sell roasted beans or green coffee, like unroasted beans, everything to do with coffee. So I went in and bought a pound of Brazilian coffee beans, brought it back, and I turned an old milk house on the farm into a little workshop that I had. So I took that popcorn maker and a measuring cup and dumped 1 cup of beans into that, and took a screwdriver, and I watched a bunch of videos. And when you're roasting coffee, there's a thing called first crack and second crack. And so when the roasted beans make a popping sound like a popcorn maker, it means that it's roasted enough to drink. It's a really light roast. And then there's second crack, and after second crack is when the dark roast starts happening. So I had never roasted or knew anything about it, so I'm just sitting there stirring and stirring and stirring, and then you start hearing this popping noise, and I was like, ooh, that's first crack. That's got to be first crack. And so I kept going. I liked a darker roast at the time, so I kept going. Second crack came, and I read that you had to cool it. Cooling it is a really important part of the roasting process. So I had a little air compressor there with a little air gun and a sieve, and I was blowing it off, and it was nighttime when I was doing this, so I was really excited for the next morning. I got up, and they're whole beans. Obviously, you're roasting the beans, and I had this ancient old blade grinder, and I'd never ground coffee before, so I just stuck it in there and ground it down to a fine powder and tossed it into the and it was a $5 grinder, and I tossed it into my $5 coffee maker, and the coffee was terrible. Really inconsistent. I didn't know anything about extraction or even how to brew it properly or anything, and but I really enjoyed doing it. It was really cool learning how, like, hearing the pops and seeing how it goes. So I watched a lot more videos, read some articles and a lot of the stuff on the internet about roasting, and kind of dove in and kept roasting on that little popcorn maker for a while. And in that time, I transitioned from farming to, I got a job at the London International Airport. Actually, Ron back here, his son Jim was my foreman, and Jim and I became really close while we were there. And Jim has a huge part to do with the first roasts of Kintore Coffee, because I was really getting into this, and I would roast and have all these. I'd have Brazilian, and I'd have Costa Rican, and I'd have Ethiopian, and I'd have them in Ziploc bags, and I'd bring them in and be like, all right, Jim, we got to try this. I got a new one. And honestly, I think mostly because of the grind that I was doing and stuff, but almost every single one of the roasts were terrible. Like we would make a cup of coffee and we would dump it out and just drink the office coffee. But again, still loving doing it. And then I started writing stuff down. I started taking it a little bit more seriously and being like, I'm putting so much time in. This thing's roasting less than 1 cup in 10 minutes. So when you did want to get a bag of coffee, you are investing quite a bit of time into actually like trying to learn it. So I started writing down like the exact weights that I was putting in and the blends of beans and stuff like that. And eventually I started getting better and better coffee. And Jim and I would sit on break and be like, you know what, that one's not half bad kind of deal. And then I started learning about the grind. And now that I know a lot about coffee, the grind of your coffee is probably the most important part of brewing. So I bought a better grinder, and then the coffee started tasting better and things like that. And Jim and I, we worked 4 12-hour shifts a week together, and 2 of those shifts would be night shifts, and a lot of the time we were driving around chatting, and part of our job was doing perimeter checks and wildlife checks and stuff like that, and so we had a lot of chats, and we were always talking about businesses, and I was saying to him, hey, I've really dove into this coffee thing. I think I'd like to try maybe selling some coffee. And so in December of 2016, I think it was, my mom, right around Christmas, she messaged me, and I do a little bit of woodworking, and she was like, hey, I have a table at the Kintore Church Bazaar. Would you like to put any of your woodworking in? And I said, yeah, sure. And so I gave her some woodworking, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try selling some of this coffee. So when I was at the airport, I was just putting the coffee in Ziploc bags or in mason jars and stuff like that. And I knew I needed something better to sell it out of. And I'd become kind of friends with one of the guys that worked at WestJet. He used to work on the apron. So one day I drove the service truck down to the apron, and he happened to be out there, and I'd had a bright idea. I didn't know any suppliers. I've never been in business or retail or anything like that. So I got thinking, I've been on a lot of planes, and I've seen a lot of puke bags. And the puke bags are poly-lined 1-pound bags with zip ties on the top. So I said to this WestJet guy, I was like, hey, I'm just trying to start this little business, and I think these puke bags would work. You think you can get your hands on any of these? And he was like, give me 5 minutes. And so I went there, and he came out with a garbage bag full of new WestJet puke bags. And I was like, all right, we got our first bag. So roasted up a few pounds. I think I had 6 pounds maybe, and gave them to my mom to try to sell at the bazaar. And none of the woodworking sold, but all of the coffee sold. And then right after that, there was a couple local, it was all local people that bought it, but a couple of the local people that bought it got a hold of me through Facebook or whatever and said, hey, it was all whole bean, and they were like, that was fantastic coffee. I'd like to buy more off of you. I'd like to buy it regularly off you. So I said, yeah, sure, just kind of shoot me a text whenever you want it, and I can roast it up fresh for you. So I started doing 4 or 5 bags every week to a few different people, and or every couple weeks, I'd say. And I was having fun with it, but on that tiny little popcorn maker, it was tough to keep up. So I went on Kijiji and I found this toaster oven. And this thing, I'm just going to leave the mic for a second. This is a tabletop coffee roaster. So it's a drum roaster. So you put coffee in there, and this is a 2-pound roaster, so I can put 2 pounds of coffee in there. And this one has you can set roast profiles in it. So the way that you roast coffee a lot of times and get like a sweetness or get a bunch of the different flavors that you taste in coffee is by spiking the heat at certain points or dropping the heat really quickly at certain times. So with this one, you could set a roast profile and you could save it so that all of your coffees were going to be the exact same as long as you were doing the same beans. So I started using this thing, and it was a game changer for me. Instead of doing 2 pounds in 3 hours, I was doing 2 pounds in 20 minutes, and I could start getting some inventory. And so Jim and I were driving around the airport, and we were talking business stuff, and I'd never, other than farming and some maintenance stuff, I'd never had a minute in business or customer service or anything like that. So I didn't know anything about it, and I said, I think I'm going to approach a Sassy's in Thorndale and see if they'd maybe sell my coffee. So, and Jim said, yeah, that's a great idea. So I had a couple bags and I went into Sassy's on my next couple days off, and I said, the owner's name at the time was Brad, and I was like, hey Brad, I was like, I'm starting this local coffee company, and I'd love to have it sold in this store. He's like, yeah, we love supporting local, and he says, what's your wholesale price? And I said, what's a wholesale price? And he says, well, what do you sell the coffee for? And I said, well, I sell it to my few customers for $15 a pound. He's like, well, I'll do the same. So what are you going to sell it to me for? I was like, $13? and he was like, sure. He's like, we like supporting local and whatever. He's like, I just got to make a couple bucks on it, so that's fine. So he said, give me a case. We didn't have cases or anything like that. So I said, how about I think it was a half a dozen. He said, sure, let's start with that. And so Sassy's was our first store, and it went well. We had, I really luck out. My wife is a graphic designer, so I still had WestJet bags, and I bought these. You can go to Staples and buy these stickers that go on the front of like parcels or like folders kind of deal, and so I bought some of those and got my wife to make up a quick logo that just said Kintore Coffee, and it had a scale on the bottom, and it said light to dark, and I would just mark if it was light or dark, and I would sell it to Brad, and he called me a couple weeks later, and he's like, hey, it went great, we're totally out. He's like, I'll double my order. So I was roasting on that thing still, and got a couple more to him, and then a few weeks after that, I thought, I'm gonna see if I kind of like this. Like I said, this is kind of fun. I'm gonna start learning about this. So read 1,000 books on business and watched 10,000 hours of YouTube videos and got my YouTube University degree, and learned a lot just on my own, just figuring it out, and then years of trial and error. But a friend of mine's aunt used to own a tea shop in Ingersoll. It was called Chocolate Tea. She also did artisanal chocolate, and so I reached out to her and I said, hey Cindy, I'm in this one store and a couple friends are popping in and buying it, and a couple people, I'd love to get on your shelves. And she said the same thing, what's your wholesale price? Let's do it. So we got in there, and it was going well there, and even just with the few people that were buying it from me via text and the 2 stores we had, I was having a tough time keeping up with that thing. So I was thinking, how do we go about getting something quicker and better? And I looked up, I was constantly looking at like bigger roasters and thinking this could be a really good side gig kind of thing. I loved my job at the airport, and it was an awesome job. It was great pay, and it was tons of time off and stuff, so I didn't want to leave it. But I thought, I'm really enjoying this, and I'm learning a lot, so I'll just get it as a side gig. And I started looking at bigger roasters, and they were tens of thousands of dollars, and I was like, I'm not willing to put that in for this side gig. So a friend of ours at the airport, his family owns a concrete company, and they said, hey, we did a big concrete job for a custom coffee roasting company in London. And he's like, I think that's what they do. So I drove out to London on my next day off. I Googled it and said coffee roasting companies in London, and finally found this one, and I just drove there and walked in and was like, hey, I'm Todd, and I would like you to roast my coffee. and they're like, you're at the right spot. That's what we do. And so I told them what blends we had. Like I roast a Brazilian, and I spike the temperature to this temperature at this far into the roast, and I drop it to here. But that's on this thing, and they've got a lot bigger roasters. So the transition into the bigger stuff can change stuff. So worked with them for a few weeks on like creating our roasts on their roasters, and it worked out great. And I remember the first order. Anytime you go through a co-packer, you have to order a minimum amount. And I remember the minimum amount back then was 200 pounds, and it was going to be $1,200 or $1,500 or something like that. And I remember like having a sit-down, serious conversation with my wife, being like, "Do you think I should do this? Is this a good idea?" Like thinking it was a life-changing thing. And now we buy many times that at a time. So it's been great. But so we got this company Heritage to start roasting for us, and they would just roast it and give it to us in 5-pound bags, and we would bag it all and put our labels on. We switched our logos up. Got my wife to do some newer professional stuff. We got out of the WestJet bags and found a company that would ship us bags, and and really started getting things moving. And since the roasting was off my hands, I thought, hey, I can hit up more stores. So a lot of the time I would just Google local shops or local markets and stuff like that. And I've always been kind of a chatty guy and never really nervous to talk to people or do cold call stuff. So I just walk in and introduce myself and tell them what we were doing, and people were interested. Kind of back then, 2016, 2017, there wasn't many local roasters. There was a couple in London and one in St. Thomas. But other than that, there was really no micro roasters. So a lot of these stores didn't have local coffee on the shelf. So a lot of people were like, yeah, we love having local stuff and we don't have any local coffee. So we got into maybe 15 stores or something like that, and things were busy, and we moved again, and we were living on a farm that my family owns, and there was like an old shop there kind of, and I moved in there, and we built a couple bars, serving bars, and I started doing live events and serving our coffee and got some banners made up, and I was still at the airport full time, but it was 4 on 4 off, so I had a lot of time, and having Heritage roast our coffee for us, I was getting inventory, and people were starting to hear about the name. Social media was kind of going wild, so we started growing our social media, and people were texting and messaging, and we were shipping coffee then. And I was like, this is getting legs. Like, this has a real chance of becoming something. And so in 2020, I was really contemplating it. We were probably in about 25 to 40 stores maybe, and it was a real thing. Like, it was every day that I had off was bagging coffee and shipping coffee and doing deliveries kind of all over, and it kind of got to a point where it was like I either gotta go all in or I gotta shut it down, because it was almost another full-time job. And I was at the airport, and it was a night shift, and I was sitting doing this, and I thought, if I grow old and I didn't try this, I think I'm gonna regret it. So I think I gotta try it. So I talked to my bosses and said, hey guys, like, I'm doing this thing and I'd really like to give it a shot. Is there any way I can get a leave of absence? And they said sure. They were really great about it, and they gave me a year leave of absence from the airport, and that was a great safety net. That was I can quit my job, I can try this, and if it doesn't work, I can go back to this great job. So I left in October or November of 2019, and this little shop that I was in, it was awful, and it was not the spot to be, so I knew I had to find a place to actually do this out of. And so I was shopping around to rent a spot, and I popped in Carrie, Carrie, Kathy, in Embro, one of the local business owners. She owns a salon, and she reached out and she was like, hey, there's attached to my building, there's a big open room that nobody's rented, and if you're looking to do something with the coffee, I think it'd be great. And I toured it, and it was just a room twice as big as this, but exactly the same, wide open with white floors. And I was like, oh, it seems like it's too much. I'm just bagging coffee and stuff in here and storing coffee. So I went and checked out a couple other spots and came back, and I was like, wow, the price is right and the space is plenty big enough. You know what, let's do it. And that was a huge move for me, because it was like, before it was just in our little shops on the farms. The only expense was the actual bags of coffee, like the cost of goods sold. Where this was a rent every month and heat bill and hydro and everything, and it was like, if I'm in, I really gotta put my head down. So that was January of 2020. I signed that lease, and I got in there, and I moved all the bars in and all my inventory, and I had little bagging machines and everything in there, and that was I started bagging, and every day that I wasn't bagging, I was on the road trying to sell coffee, and things were going awesome. And then March of 2020 hit, and so we opened in January, and we had to close down in March, and it was terrifying. It was when they first mentioned it, you're kind of like, well, it's only going to be around for a couple weeks or something. I guess like maybe we can move things online. We had a website, and we had online sales and stuff like that, but I had no idea what was to come, and so we closed down in March, and then I got to rewind just for a second. So we took over the building, and in November, and I was bagging in there, and people that would come in the door to go to the salon, they would smell all the fresh coffee, and they would say, oh, hey, I can smell coffee in here, can I get a cup? And I'd say, oh no, we just roast coffee, like we're a wholesale company. And then there was constantly customers going to the salon, so I would brew coffee and I would just set a carafe out by the door, like my door, and as people came in, they could just grab a cup of coffee if they wanted. And Carrie, the salon owner, and a couple people going in were like, hey, Embro could really use a spot like a cafe, you should think about doing that. And I was like, no, we're a wholesale company, I don't want to do it. And then the wheels get turning, and I already had the bars already made, and I had coffee makers for the live shows and stuff like that. So I put my head down and painted the whole building, and I built all the furniture. I built all the tables and all the signs and all the bars, and bought a couch and a couple chairs and another coffee maker. And I went and bought, if you go to a nice cafe anywhere, they've got really, really beautiful, expensive espresso machines, and I went to Canadian Tire and I bought a $500 espresso machine. I didn't think Embro would be a huge espresso spot, but turns out it is now. And I'm really, really bootstrapped it. Like, we had used equipment, and you read a lot of stuff on cafes and watch a lot of stuff, and a lot of these people say, oh, it's going to cost $150,000 to open a cafe and stuff. And we did ours for like a few $1,000s to start. We had tables like this, and like I said, I made a couple of tables, and we had a little bit of nice furniture and stuff. And so that's from November till January, that's what I did. And then I opened, and then that's what we had to close down. We had to close down the cafe. But the wholesale was still going. We were considered essential because we were a grocery item. So so we closed down the cafe and started really buckling down on selling coffee to the stores and stuff like that. And so that's 2020, and with all the changes of COVID and everything like that, we were allowed to open our doors, but you weren't allowed to have it in sitting inside. So we moved all the shelves and stuff up so you could just walk in and grab a coffee and leave. And then you were allowed people in, but no more than a certain amount. So we rearranged the place like 5 times to follow rules. And then I hired a guy to help me bag coffee and help run the cafe. And on the days that I wasn't at the cafe, I was hitting the road, and I was going to your independent grocer in Ingersoll, and I really wanted to, I knew nothing about grocery, like how to get into grocery, but I thought, I've just dove into everything else, why not see if we can get into this? So I knew the owner's name was Rob Tremblett, so I just went to customer service and said, hey, can I talk to Rob? And I said, and he said, yeah, and I went up into his office and I said, hey, I got this local coffee company, can I bring my coffee in here? And he was like, no, unfortunately, with Loblaws, there's a ton of red tape and stuff. He's like, but you should talk to this distribution company. They specialize in small businesses like yours, and they can probably make something happen. So he wrote down the guy's name, he wrote down Ryan, and he wrote down his phone number, and it was, I forget the number, so I'll just make one up, but he said, he wrote down 519-283-646, and he forgot the last number. And I just grabbed the paper and put it in my pocket, and I was like, thanks so much, I'll give this guy a call tomorrow. And so I had the next day off, and I woke up and grabbed the piece of paper, and I noticed the last number wasn't on it, and I was like, I really want this to work out, so I called 283-6461. I was like, hey, is this Ryan who owns a distribution company? And they were like, nope. And I was like, okay, see you later. And it was 6468, the last number. But it was Ryan, and he answered, and he was like, yeah. It was wild. A lot of this stuff you have to usually do like a bunch of samples and back and forth and stuff. And this guy was like, yeah, we don't have any coffee right now, for sure. He's like, send me your product list and your distribution pricing. So back in the beginning, I didn't know what wholesale pricing was. Now I didn't know what distribution pricing was. So I was like, absolutely, we got that right here. And then hung up and was like, how to come up with distribution pricing. And so figured it out, and there was a ton of hurdles, but we started shipping to this distribution company, and it was wild because they would put in orders for like, we need 700 cases of coffee or something, and we're used to doing like 7 or 15 would be like, for one store would be like, yeah. And so me and Mark, the guy that was working with me, we were bagging nonstop. Mark's job most of the week was just bagging coffee all the time. And it was going really cool. It was really awesome, but it was like a freight train, and we had like I said, I'd never done anything in business, so I was just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, and I was wearing assless chaps, right? And so that distribution company was called Grey J Distribution, and they called me one day, and they're like, "Hey, your product's doing great." This is probably 2021. They called me one day and they were like, "Hey, your product's doing great. We've been approached by Loblaws and they want to launch a local program. And they told us to choose 11 companies that we work with that they think would do well in Loblaws. They're like, so we want to choose you. Is this something you'd be interested in?" And I was like, "Yeah, for sure." This was how I got your name, was trying to get into a Loblaws store. He's like, "Okay, well, they're going to launch in 5 stores to start and see how it goes." So, and I can't remember the stores. Definitely Ingersoll was one, and I think Kitchener, and then a couple in Toronto area. So they launched me in 5, and it went really well. So then they called us maybe a month or 2 later, and they were like, "Hey, it went really good. We want to try you in 50. And so we hired another person to help out at the cafe because Mark was so busy bagging all the time, and we were just about to get into 50 new stores. So so we tried it in 50, and the whole local program with all 11 companies went really well for everybody. And so Loblaws approached Grey J and said, "Hey, we want to really launch this local program, and since it's local, that means for us, like, local means Woodstock or Ingersoll, but local in grocery means Ontario. If you're from Ontario, it's still a local company." And so they're like, "We want to launch our local program across Ontario. And we want all 11 companies to do it." So it's going to be 155 stores across Ontario, from like Sault Ste. Marie to Windsor to Ottawa, all over Toronto and everything like that. But in grocery, you have to pay these listing fees. So anything you see on the shelf while you're walking up and down the aisle, these companies have paid many, many tens of thousands of dollars to be there. And it's a really, really crazy thing that grocery does. So right now, to list a product in Loblaws, it's $18,000 per SKU, and we have 10 SKUs without the cold brew, right? So, and I didn't know anything about listing fees at the time. So they were like, "Hey, Todd, congrats! Like, the local program's going to take off. They want to launch you guys Ontario-wide, but you have to pay some sort of listing fee." And I was like, "What's that?" And they told me that, and I was like, "Unfortunately, I love the idea of this happening." And I was like, "But we're so small, and scaling takes a ton of money. Like, you're buying more inventory, and you don't get that money back until it sells and you get paid for it, right?" So it was just it was extremely exciting and extremely stressful at the same time. And I was like, "Well, we don't have like much money at all to pay any listing fees." And Grey J said, "Well, they're not typical listing fees." They said, "We're going to buy shelves for every company, for every store, and you just have to pay for the shelves." And they said it was going to be $25,000. And I was like, "I really appreciate it, but we definitely don't have $25,000. And he said, "Todd, he's like, you're going to have 10 products listed with Loblaws for $25,000. He's like, you just won the grocery store lottery." He's like, "Find the money." So I wrote an email to like friends and family and stuff like that, and I said, "Hey, we've got this really awesome opportunity, but we don't have the funds for it." And a couple people did step up and say, "Hey, we'd love to help you," but we didn't end up needing it, because instead of just launching into 150 stores, they launched in with these shelves. They launched into like 15, and then a month later 15 more, and then a month later 15 more. So it was a slow build up. We would sell coffee to those stores, they would pay for it, and it would just kept paying for the next shelf and the next shelf and the next shelf. So it worked out really well. And over the next year and a half or so, we were all over Ontario, but we were still in paper bags. Like, we were, Loblaws is a beast on its own thing, and you don't get to give them recommended pricing or anything. So we were selling to our distribution company. Distribution company was selling to Loblaws. Loblaws would put it out for whatever they want. This is before coffee was really expensive. You could buy a bag of coffee for $12, but you'd walk into a grocery store in Napanee and see our coffee in there for $27. And you couldn't tell them anything, and it was in paper bags, so the freshness was gone by the time the store even got it. So it went really, really well for about 6 months, and then it really died off. And we kind of stopped pushing it in there, and then oddly enough, Loblaws, at like the height of support local, sent a message out and said effective immediately, we are dropping all local companies. So, which is crazy, eh? So that was a huge scare for us as well. It was like, all right, we're scaling, we bought more equipment, we bought all this inventory, a lot of things happened, we rented another building, a lot of stuff was happening, and then Loblaws turned the tap off, and you were like, holy moly. So another big scary part in the company was that, and then we had been hearing a lot of people love drinking iced coffee and stuff like that, and we have the cafe, so a lot of days people would be ordering a lot of iced coffees, and I'd heard of cold brew here, and so we started learning about cold brew, and this is maybe 5 years ago, and nobody was doing it. Like, there was one company in London that we talked to on how to do it, and they were getting out of the business, and we ended up buying their business off them. It was mainly an inventory buyout kind of thing, but he taught us how to brew cold brew and how to sort of can it, and do create a product like this. That was iced coffee in a can, basically. And so while the Loblaw stuff was kind of at its peak and just starting to come down, we bought the small company called Workshop Cold Brew and just absorbed it and put it into Kintore Coffee and started brewing cold brew. And it's my favorite product that the company sells, but it has been the biggest pain in my butt for the last 5 years. It is a ton of work and a ton of time. But we started, we have all these buckets, and we bought great big stainless steel tanks and everything like that, and we started with like these mini cans that are soft. So fun fact, I feel like I'm rambling, sorry. Unlike beer or pop or anything like that, if you put pop or beer in a can, the CO2 is fizzing, right? So you put the lid on, and that's what gives the structure to the can, as it's creating pressure in there. But with coffee, there's no bubbles, right? So for years, we tried for years to figure out how to get structure in the can, and we sold thousands of cans of coffee with, like, you touched it and it was like a soft hand when you're shaking somebody's hand. People grab it and be like, oh, I think this thing's spoiled, and you're like, nah, it's supposed to be like that. But we wanted the structure, and after literally months and months and months of trying to figure this out, we heard that juice companies were using liquid nitrogen to get structure in their cans. And so with farming and everything, I knew a lot, like I used to deal with Praxair and stuff like that, and for our kegs of cold brew, we would use gas nitrogen. That's what you had to use to pump the coffee out of the keg. So our nitrogen supplier came, and I was like, hey, do you guys have any liquid nitrogen? Or I said, do you need a license to get any liquid nitrogen? And he said, no, I've got some in the truck, do you want it? And I said, yeah, big tank. And so it was this tank like this big. And he brought it inside, he's like, here you go. He's like, the first one's on the house, it's on me. And so we were just like science class, like dumping it everywhere, and like it was gassing up everywhere. And but we were like, let's give this a shot. We had some empty cans and from the soft cans that we were doing. So we took it right out of the keg and filled a can up. And Mark was still working with me, and he was a big part of the company in the beginning, and we were like, how full do you put in, and how much liquid nitrogen do you put in or anything? And so we tried doing a little bit of research, but we didn't have our math right, so we filled it almost to the top, and then I was like, I'm just going to put a shot in. So I had a shot glass there, and I put an entire shot of liquid nitrogen in it, and then put it in the can seamer and seamed it, and as I'm seaming it, it starts like popping and bubbling, and I was like, and it just goes boom. Totally blows up, and there's coffee all over the ceiling and everything. And so it was a bit of a trial and error. We were like, all right, let's try a half a shot next time. And so we figured it out, and then going from there to these cans, we couldn't scale it with like, okay, we've got a big vat of liquid nitrogen and you dump a little bit in this one. We were trying with like a teaspoon in every single one, and it was a nightmare. So we learned that these canning companies that travel around Ontario and go to a lot of these craft breweries and stuff, there's one that has a liquid nitrogen doser, and it comes on the canning line, and as the can goes by, it just goes drop, 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 and it's constantly dropping just a drip of liquid nitrogen in. And it was another huge, scary move. Like, just like the Heritage Coffee, there's minimums. So we were doing a couple of 20-gallon pails, a couple 20-liter pails every couple weeks, just to kind of have it as a product. But when we talked to this canning company, they were like, we'll show up and do whatever you want, but we're going to charge you for a minimum of 1,200 liters. And so that was when we rented another building. We needed a building for these canning lines to come in and stuff. And so we rented the building and bought the tanks and everything like that. And it was all bootstrapped. Like, I couldn't afford actual brewing company equipment like breweries have, but there was a local store in Woodstock that dealt with dairy equipment, like milk equipment. And I was like, it's all super food grade stuff. Like, milk spoils incredibly quick. It's all stainless steel. It's all food grade hookups and everything. So I went and talked to them. I was like, hey, I heard you guys are going out of business. Do you guys have any bulk tanks? And they were like, we don't have any bulk tanks, like traditional bulk tanks, but we have milk holding tanks. And they were like, we had them for sale for $15,000, but we'll give them to you for $3,000. So I bought those and brought them in and gave them a big clean and sanitize, and we started brewing 1,200 liters of cold brew, and the canning line came in and it worked out awesome, and we were one of the only companies that were doing these. There was 2 companies that were doing canned cold brew forever, and I still think there's only 2 in Ontario that are doing canned cold brew. So that was a huge step for us, and that was another big avenue for us. While we were doing that, I've always banked with a bank in Ingersoll called First Ontario Credit Union. My mom worked there and retired out of there. I've been a member there forever. And some of the cashiers were like, hey, First Ontario does this big business awards thing. They're like, it's really hard to get into, but we'll give you the contact. We think you should reach out. So I reached out to the First Ontario people, and I was like, oh, hey, the First Ontario Awards, I was told to reach out about. They were like, well, we usually only keep it to the GTA. And they're like, but you've been a member forever, so sure, we'll let you apply. So I applied for it, and it was 90 businesses, mainly from the GTA, went to the Hamilton Tiger Cat Stadium and had to do a pitch. And you had 20 minutes to pitch your company to 12 different dragons, call it. Like, it was very much Dragon's Den style. So I went and did that, and I went overtime. As you can see, I like to ramble. But I went just overtime, but when I got done, they were like, they must have liked it, because they usually like shut the mic off at 20 minutes exactly, and I went to 21 and a half or something like that. And I was pretty nervous and stuff, and then they called me back and they said, hey, you're in the top 3. We need you to come and do a couple more, like, meet the people and showcase your product and stuff. So I did that, and we ended up winning the First Ontario Awards. And it was huge for us. It was a big cash prize, and then the whole package was worth $30,000. So we got $10,000 in cash, but then we got to work with an advertising company for a year. I got a business mentor for a year. Just all kinds of these things where when you're grinding like I was and am, it's easy to not change things. It's like, well, just keep on working. I don't have time to figure out how to change this and do it the efficient way. So you'd sit down with these business mentors, and they'd be like, so go through your day-to-day. And I'd be like, well, Monday I start as soon as I wake up, and I don't go to sleep, and I just keep working all the time. And they, like, you'd bring up any sort of problem you had, and these people would just be like, oh, just do it this way. And they would like point you in a direction where you're like, oh my God, you just saved me 20 hours a week. Like, it was invaluable having these people. And then the advertising companies and stuff like that too. It was an awesome thing to win. We were really, really happy with that. Then the following year, I feel like I'm bragging here. I promise I'm just telling the story, sorry. The following year though, we got nominated for Best New Business in Oxford County, I think it is, through the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce, and we won that as well. So we were getting these accolades, and we were growing, and everything was going great, and that pretty much takes us to kind of where we are today. Like Loblaws really dropped off. The cafe, like we're not really in any Loblaws now. We're in, when it comes to chains, we're with Food Basics and Foodland and a couple Sobeys here and there and stuff like that. But mainly we're really trying to stick to local business, not dealing with the corporate. It's really tough dealing with those guys. So we really want to scale the company through small business and stuff like that. And we really do think that the cold brew is kind of the next big step for us. Over COVID, it went from 3 or 4 roasters locally to like 20 or something like that. So anytime we approach a store now and you say, hey, we're a local coffee company, we'd love to get on your shelf, and they say, oh, my uncle's brother's nephew, he roasts coffee, he works for Hydro One, but he roasts coffee on the weekends, so we use his coffee. And you're kind of like, oh, he's got a great job, he needs to stop doing that. But then we say, well, do you guys carry any cold brew? And everybody's always like, oh my God, this is such a unique product. Let's bring it in for sure. And then inevitably 3 months later, the Hydro One guy's like, you know what? I don't need to put my spare time into this thing. I'll quit. So then they don't have a coffee company, but they've got our cold brew. So they say you might as well bring your coffee in too. But that has been this week. This is insider info here, guys. I really want to get the cold brew to the same place that the coffee is, where we can have it co-packed. It's really, really hard to scale stuff in-house, right? So you can either take the route of manufacturing and controlling the quality and everything like that, but then you got to buy all the equipment, you got to have people to run the equipment, you got to learn how to maintain it all, or you can go the route we did with them roasting it, where they have their own quality assurance and they can do it, and you can focus on growing the company. We'd really love to get the cold brew to that spot. And literally just this week, well, I guess last week it started, we found a co-packer to help us with this. They do wine and cider and a little bit of beer, but they do have a nitro doser, which is rare. A lot of people don't. And they said, yeah, I think we can do this. And we did a couple test runs with them, like really, really small batch, and it wasn't 100%, but we thought we got the bugs worked out. And they were like, okay, we've done enough test runs. We need to do our minimum, and the minimum was 2,000 liters, which is 1,200 is by far the most we've ever done. So last Wednesday, I went to the place and brewed it with them and taste tested everything and signed off on it. And then I was going on a trip out west, and I left on Thursday out west. I got back on Monday, and last Thursday I got the finished product, and it the black is 100% undrinkable. Yeah, so it's been a stressful couple weeks here, a week and a half. So we're dealing with that, and those are the, like, that's the ups and downs, right? Like you really hone in and put your hope and belief into like a product, and something like this can happen. So we're working on a pivot, trying to figure out what to do with it. But I really do believe that our next big move will be with the canned cold brew for sure. So, but yeah, and I didn't talk much about the cafe. Kathy, you're a regular there. We love seeing you in there, and the cafe's always been awesome. The Embro community I was really worried about a cafe. I had no plans on ever owning a cafe, and it's one of my favorite places. I love going in there. I love all the people we've met. We have probably 30 people that come in we got a lot of people that are just popping in, and construction crews and farmers and stuff like that. Probably 30 people every single day come in, and we've really gotten to know them, know their families, know what everybody drinks, and it's a really great community spot. We connected with about 20 local businesses that create like soap and lavender and sewing, like knitting stuff and all kinds of stuff. So we have about 20 vendors that sell their products out of our spot. When we first opened, it was mainly just drip coffee and that little $500 espresso machine. We've really upgraded the whole cafe. It's really cute and cozy, and we do everything. I like to say we're the same as consider us a less pretentious Starbucks. We can do anything that Starbucks can do, just we won't have the attitude behind it. So, and it's been a wild, super fun ride, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of in my life is starting this company and taking it to where it has. So it's been great, but it is very much filled with like the highest highs and the lowest lows. For sure. So, I don't know if I filled my time, but I would love to do some Q&A. Is that all right? Yeah.
Sounds good.
Sweet. I'm gonna get a sip of water here too. Does anybody have any questions?
What kind of drip coffee maker do you recommend for the average household to drip your coffee?
The most expensive one. The coffee maker is not a huge deciding factor. Like if you go like the Black & Decker dirt cheap $20 machine, you're not going to get a great coffee out of it. But you can go very middle of the road, like a $50 or $75 coffee maker from your local grocery store. Like I said, the grind is so much more important. If you are going to be grinding your own beans and you have like a blade grinder, one that you just get for spices or anything like that, and you like the tradition of like, oh, I get up in the morning and I grind my beans and I make my coffee, I would say buy the cheap coffee maker and buy the expensive grinder, because what the taste is the extraction that you're getting from those grinds. So if you have one piece of grind that's that big and another one that's really tiny and one that, because that blade's just in there hitting any bean that bounces around, so it's not going to get a consistent grind all the way through. So a burr grinder, that's not a brand, it's a type of grinder. You can buy burr grinders anywhere. They are a little bit more expensive, but it's rollers, and so the coffee's going to fall into that roller and every bean's going to get crushed the exact same. And then when you put it in the filter and brew it, it's going to pull the flavor out evenly through the whole basket. So the coffee maker is not a huge deal, but the grinder is. So if you're like, oh, I love having a whole bean, but you got a crappy grinder, I would say buy ground coffee, like because somebody like us, we're gonna have a super high quality grinder that does everything there. So you might get little tiniest bit less quality because you're already ground it, but you're gonna get way better coffee because it's ground even. If that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
I did. That was all new information.
Yeah, there you
so
go.
much of what you said.
Would you also use it in a French press?
Yes, French press is my favorite type of coffee. Yeah, like I love espressos and stuff like that. But yeah, if I were to say like one coffee for the rest of my life, I would say French press. Yeah, French press, you want a coarser grind, but we do French press with our current grind almost every morning. You just do get a little bit more grit in the bottom. That's all. So. Anybody else? Yeah, back corner.
Where do you get their coffee from? Like you always hear about fair trade and all that, so where does all that fit in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was hoping somebody would ask that. Most of our coffees are blends, and they're almost all from Central and South America. So we've got a couple that are Brazilian and Colombian, a couple that are Costa Rican and Brazilian. The decaf is Ethiopian, so not Central or South America there, but and the fair trade and organic thing. That was a big question in my mind when we first started, is should we go that route? And we decided we had the choice. We can get any of our beans that we roast, we can get them organic fair trade. But when I lived in Hawaii, the lady that owned the farm, Nita, she had this little 5-acre farm, and right beside her, or a couple farms down, was this really big coffee farm. The coffee farm was certified organic and fair trade, and it was a tourist area. And all of these people were like flooding to this other place and buying a ton of this big farmer's coffee. And Nita was this wonderful old lady that had emphysema, and she couldn't do any of the work. So we were doing every single thing on that farm the exact same way as the really big corporate farm, but she couldn't afford the certificates for the fair trade or the organic. And it was, I forget the numbers, but it was really expensive. And I can't remember if she inherited that farm, how she got that farm, but she was doing organic fair trade coffee, but she couldn't afford these certificates. And I hated seeing like this small, hands-on lady that was doing everything right, but losing out on almost all, like probably like 75% of the sales that were happening in the area, because this big corporation comes in and puts a stamp on something for $25,000. So when we opened, we decided, I come from a family farm, and those kind of big certifications that you need, they're putting small family farms and stuff like that, maybe not out of business, but they're definitely creating massive hurdles for these companies. And then when a few years ago, I went to Costa Rica, and while we were there, I wanted to go to a farm that grows some of our coffee. So we went to this co-op, and we asked the guy who ran the co-op. This co-op worked with 130 local coffee companies in that area. Through the co-op, they bought backhoes, they bought all the baskets that you pick coffee in and everything like that. And we said, what's your thoughts on fair trade certified and organic certified? And he's like, it is absolute garbage. He said the fair trade price that the Fair Trade Board offers them is less than they would ever sell coffee for. He's like, if coffee fell to the price that they offer, he's like, we wouldn't grow coffee, we would have cows. Like, so he's like, the Fair Trade Board came in and set this price and say, this is fair trade, but this is where they need to sell it to make a profit on it. So he's like, nobody would ever sell coffee at fair trade price because it's too cheap. And then the organic thing, he was saying, and I'm sure there's some farmers in here, like organic still gets spray on it. It's just certain sprays that you can't. And there's like, I'm not anti fair trade or organic. I'm just not super pro either, just because the amount of hassle it puts on small farms compared to big farms. Like Coca-Cola can easily sign that and say like, yeah, we got the stamp. Like, but the small family person can't. So that's why we're not. We consciously chose not to. That's a long way around to say no, we're not. Anybody else? Katie?
The level of success that you've achieved doesn't make sense. In your storytelling, what's wholesale pricing, like every step of the way, you shared with us why you were really set up to not succeed because you didn't have that business background. Yet you've been incredibly successful and have had a willingness to navigate challenges and failures over and over. And how much do you think your background of growing up in a rural community in agriculture and growing up in a farming family, in a farming community, was a piece of what built you to be able to be resilient in that landscape?
It's a great question, and I think it does. I loop back to it over and over again as these hurdles and stuff come up, because growing up on a farm, like, work ethic is built into you. Like, you just get the job done, and you find a way. Like, if the path to getting the job done is busted, you have to go this way. But most farmers, like, you see it all the time. Like, you hear the words farm fix, right? Like, you grab a piece of rebar and weld it on, and grab a pylon and stick it on the end, and there's your divider for your corn row, right? Like, so finding those ways and those pivots and things like that, I think definitely, like, it's I can't come to a hurdle and say, oh, this is too much, I'm gonna throw in the towel, and then look out in the field and it's 4:30 in the morning and my dad's still working in the field, and sit here with a smile on my face and say, like, well, I gave him my best shot, because he's 75 years old and just put in a 21-hour day. So I think, like, that work ethic and the trials and tribulations of farming. I used to farm my own land before the airport, and I got out of it because the year that I got out, I did every single thing right, and I was growing kidney beans, and the kidney beans were a little bit of an orange color, and they're supposed to be red, and I was selling them to Kraft. I believe it was Kraft, and they said, yeah, that should be fine, don't worry about it, everything went perfect. Harvested the crop, drove it to wherever it was, dropped it off, and they said, oh, it's too orange, we can't sell that, so we're not gonna pay you for it. And so I was selling it, it's crazy to think of the price change now, but I was selling it for 51 cents a pound. And they're like, we will find a buyer for it. Since it went into their elevator, the crop insurance wouldn't do anything with it. And so they offered me 6 cents a pound instead of the 51 cents a pound. And something like that is like, I didn't do anything wrong there. Like, I planted the crop, I harvested it when it needed to, I sprayed it when it needed to, and I lost 90% of my profit on it because the color of it was the wrong color. And things like that happen to farmers daily. Like your barn gets a disease and the entire livestock crop is gone, right? Like or herd, sorry. So yeah, I think growing up and seeing that my whole life, with my grandpa being a farmer and dad, like it definitely puts the work ethic into you for sure. So yeah. Anybody else?
Do you wanna, sorry, one last one.
Yeah, bring it on.
There was a small sliver of your story where you like left out like a really key piece. In between your small start and as you started to grow, you used to offer home delivery.
Yeah, we still do.
Do you really?
Yeah,
don't tell us that.
Yeah, if you go on the website, we're trying to set up something different so that I don't have to do it, but if you go on the website, it might have actually just got taken off within the last like couple months, but I delivered to a front doorstep today in London. We go to Lisa Cooper's place every month. She's got a subscription for Cold Brew in Tunsford, and we drop off to her doorstep. She leaves a cooler out. I don't know if these bags, but the website and anywhere you see a phone number on any of our products is my personal phone number. But yeah, like I think it is off the website, but you used to be able to pick local delivery on the website up until recently, and it still could be there. I don't go on the website much. And there's no like drop-off spots like at Upper Thames or something like that, and you just put your website in, and if you're in a certain specific area code, it just goes to your house and we deliver it to you.
I didn't know, you used to have that creepy van. So the delivery in the creepy van was like the highlight, and then
we still got.
And then you get a visit out of it with Todd.
We still have, that was it. So when we started, I just had a car, and then I was like, I need something to deliver this in. So I found a 1994 Chevy Astro van high top, and it was awesome. And I got some trim clad, and I painted it matte black, and it had windows all down the side. It was like an old camper style one, and I loved it. And after a year and a half, or maybe 2 years, it broke down. We called it the Predator. And so then we upgraded, and now we have the Predator 2.0, which is just another camper van, but a little bit newer. Fun fact about the Predator 2.0 is we have not had reverse for the last 3 months. And I do deliveries in it every Friday.